Everyone laughed when Claire Jensen spent her last $500 on a rusted old military bunker buried in the hills outside of town. But when she broke open the door and the sunlight hit what was inside, an untouched World War II military jeep, crates of sealed documents, and personal items from the D-Day landings, the air changed. What began as a desperate gamble turned into a discovery that would rewrite not just her story, but history itself. And at the heart of it all, a soldier's hidden legacy was waiting to be uncovered. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if you love stories of forgotten places and the powerful truths they hold, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode might just be even more incredible than this one. The auction listing was barely a sentence long. Decommissioned military site. Sealed. Buyer responsible for transport. Lot #47. There were no photos, no dimensions, and definitely no guarantees. Most bidders skipped right over it. A handful laughed. One guy, with too much cologne and not enough manners, said it probably smelled like rat pee and regret. But Claire Jensen kept staring at the screen. Her shop had been quiet for months. No real money coming in, just the odd brake job or tire rotation. She'd fixed up an old El Camino last spring and sold it for just enough to keep the lights on, but nothing steady followed. Her savings had bled down to fumes. $500 wasn't nothing, but it was all she had left. And still, something about that listing made her chest tighten. It was late, nearly midnight, when she placed the bid. She didn't even think. Just clicked the mouse and shut her laptop before she could regret it. She told herself it was a gamble. A story, maybe. Something to break the monotony of broken timing belts and invoices that never got paid. When the email came the next morning, "You won," in bold red letters, she blinked, and then laughed. "Guess we're really doing this," she muttered to herself, standing in the middle of her cluttered garage. The bunker was 30 minutes out of town, tucked behind a ridge that hadn't seen foot traffic since Carter was president. A concrete dome embedded into the earth, half swallowed by tall grass and silence. The steel door was rusted shut, the hinges swollen with time. A faded warning plaque peeled off the side. U.S. property. No entry, as if even the metal had grown tired of guarding whatever was inside. She brought tools, gloves, and her friend Jonah, who owed her a favor and never missed a chance to swing a crowbar. It took both of them, and a can of WD-40, just to get the locking bar to move. The sound it made was something between a groan and a sigh, like the bunker itself was waking up after a long, heavy sleep. Claire grabbed the handle, paused. Her heart ticked hard in her chest. Then she pulled. The door opened slowly, resisting at first, then giving way with a metallic scrape. Dust and stale air poured out like a held breath. And there it was. In the yellowed light streaming through the open door, a shape emerged. Angular. Familiar. It sat in silence, wheels intact, frame dusty but solid. A World War II-era Willys MB Jeep. Behind it, stacked crates, some wooden, some metal, all untouched. Claire took a step inside. No one was laughing now. The air inside the bunker was thick, not with dust, but with something heavier. History, memory. The kind of silence that felt earned, not abandoned. Claire stood at the threshold, her boots scuffing against the cold concrete, heartbeat echoing in her ears. Jonah said nothing. He just whistled low, stepping back with wide eyes. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" he asked. She nodded once, slow. The Jeep's grille caught the light just right, like a face emerging from shadow, worn but proud. It was olive drab, the paint chipped in places but still clinging on. The windshield was folded down, straps weathered but unbroken. Tires cracked with age, sure, but not flat, not ruined. Whoever parked it here hadn't abandoned it. They'd preserved it. Claire took another step forward, her fingers brushing the side of a crate as she passed. It was metal, stamped with a faded serial number and the outline of a star. Her flashlight beam swept across the room. Dozens of them. Crates of different sizes, some marked in French, others with codes she didn't understand. One had a tag still dangling. Ration Type K, 1944. This wasn't just junk. This was a sealed time capsule. I thought this was going to be empty, Jonah said, breaking the quiet. Or full of asbestos or possums. Claire didn't answer, her gaze locked on the back wall, where more equipment lined the shelves, canteens, mess kits, helmets. A canvas duffel slumped in the corner, its zipper rusted shut. She stepped toward it, crouched, and tugged the fabric. It flaked under her fingers, but it held. She wiped away grime and dust. A name was stitched across the top. T. Ashford. She sat back on her heels, the letters swimming in her mind. There were no records, no paperwork, no notice in the auction listing, no mention of contents, just bunker, sealed. You think the government just forgot about this? Jonah asked. Claire stood again, slower this time. No, she said quietly. I think someone made sure it was forgotten. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt deliberate. Every crate perfectly stacked. Every item placed, not thrown. The Jeep didn't look like it had been left behind. It looked like it had been put to sleep, stored with purpose, hidden. She walked back toward the door and looked outside. The wind stirred the grass. The world carried on. No one would suspect what waited here beneath the surface. Jonah was still pacing. This has to be worth something. A museum, maybe, or... Not yet, Claire said. She wasn't ready to hand it over. Not without knowing the full story. There was too much care in this space. Too much intention. Someone went through the trouble of sealing history inside these walls. She had to understand why. Claire turned back toward the crates. Help me open one, she said. And just like that, the past began to breathe again. The lid groaned as Jonah cracked open the first crate. A plume of ancient dust rose, catching the sunlight like smoke in a chapel. Inside were canvas rolls neatly folded, stamped with faded red crosses. Medical supplies, bandages still wrapped in wax paper, glass bottles with corks, yellowed labels barely legible, morphine sulfate, quinine. A field surgical kit sat on top, its metal clasps still secure. Claire leaned in. Her breath caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. This stuff's untouched, she whispered, like it's been waiting. Jonah ran a hand through his hair. No mold, no rats, no collapse. It's like they sealed it and locked time out. She moved to the next crate. This one heavier, wooden. She pried it open with a crowbar and heard the snap of aged nails giving way. Inside, a stack of folders wrapped in oilcloth, military files, maps, tactical overlays drawn on tracing paper. Some marked confidential, others stamped Omaha Beach. Her fingers hovered above them, afraid to damage something irreplaceable. Then she noticed the envelope tucked behind the files. Personal, handwritten, it was sealed in wax, though time had made the stamp brittle and flaked. The name on the front stopped her cold. Private Thomas Ashford, same as the duffel bag. She held the envelope gently, like it might shatter. It didn't look like a military memo. It looked like a letter. A goodbye. She didn't open it, not yet. Something about the weight of it made her want to understand who he was first. What he had done. Why this bunker existed at all. Claire, Jonah called softly. She turned. He was standing near the far wall now, holding something square in his hands. A photo frame. He passed it to her. It was black and white, yellowed with age, but the image was clear. 5 men in uniform standing in front of the Jeep, the very same one now sleeping behind them. All young, all smiling. The one in the center held a wrench in one hand and a cigarette in the other. On the back, a scribbled note. Last roll before the jump, June 5th, 44. Claire's stomach tightened. June 5th, the day before D-Day. She looked back toward the Jeep. Its hood still bore a unit number, partially scratched out. Below it, a painted name in white. Eleanor. That wasn't standard, Jonah said, giving vehicles names like that. It was personal, Claire said. Someone loved this thing. She turned back to the crates, eyes scanning the rest of the bunker. Each box, each piece, was part of something larger, a story no one had heard, a legacy locked away, not forgotten, just waiting. Jonah glanced at her. You think this guy Ashford hid it all on purpose? Claire's grip tightened on the envelope. She nodded slowly. I think this bunker was his secret. And whatever happened to him, he didn't want it erased. She looked down at the letter again. It was time to learn who Private Thomas Ashford really was. The town's library smelled like paper and patience. Claire sat hunched over the microfilm machine, the screen casting a soft glow on her face as she scrolled through old war records. Most people wouldn't know where to start, but Claire's father had been a Marine. He'd taught her that history isn't always found in textbooks sometimes. It hides in the footnotes. She'd already combed the Army archives online. Nothing. No record of a Private Thomas Ashford, listed as KIA or MIA from the Normandy campaign. It was like he had never existed, but that only made her more certain he had, because someone had packed those crates. Someone had sealed that door, and someone had named a jeep Eleanor. 1. She flipped through local enlistment rosters from the early 1942. And there it was, just a line. Ashford, Thomas E. Logistics Division, 506th PIR. Assigned 1943, Fort Bragg. No photo, no detailed record, just a brief note. Reassigned. Confidential deployment. May 1944. She whispered it aloud. Confidential deployment. What's that supposed to mean? She muttered, scribbling it down. Back at her garage that night, Claire cleared off her workbench and laid out everything she had. The photo, the sealed letter, the maps, the duffel, and now that single, nearly erased paper trail. She stared at it all, feeling like she'd stepped into the first chapter of a novel someone never got to finish. Jonah dropped by around 10, balancing 2 coffees and a bag of gas station donuts. Find anything? His name, she said, holding up the slip. Just barely. Jonah leaned over. 506th? That's the same division as the Band of Brothers guys. Exactly, she said. But he wasn't infantry. Logistics. That means gear, movement, supply chains. He wasn't storming the beach. He was making sure others could. Then why would someone like that get a secret deployment? Jonah asked. Claire picked up the envelope again. Still sealed. Still heavy. He knew something, she said quietly. Or carried something they didn't want in the wrong hands. She looked at the jeep through the garage window. Dust still clung to its edges, but it looked different now, like it was watching her back. She sat down, took a breath, and broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, folded twice. No date, no address. Just handwriting, tight and neat. If you're reading this, then you found what I left behind. I wasn't supposed to. I know that. Orders were clear, but I couldn't. Not after what I saw. Claire's skin prickled. I buried it because the truth doesn't always survive the war. I'm not a hero. I didn't fight on the beach. I didn't carry a gun that day. But I carried something else. Something they wanted erased. There was no signature. Just the initials. T-E-A. Claire folded the letter and set it down gently. Whatever Thomas Ashford saw, whatever he hid, it hadn't been for him. It had been for someone like her. Someone who would care enough to uncover it. Claire waited until the rain had passed. The morning light hit the garage just right, soft and slanted, casting golden lines through the bay doors and lighting up the dust in the air. The jeep sat where she'd rolled it 2 nights earlier, still caked in silence, still watching. She rolled up her sleeves, grabbed a ratchet set, and knelt beside it. Every bolt she turned felt like a handshake from the past. The metal creaked reluctantly, but it moved. Not frozen, not ruined, just waiting. Jonah arrived mid-morning with breakfast and questions. "You gonna start it?" Claire shook her head. "Not yet. Want to understand it first." They worked side by side, peeling back layers. The battery was long gone. The wiring was primitive, cloth-wrapped, brittle. But what puzzled her was how intact everything was. The canvas seats were weathered, sure, but not shredded. The fuel line was dry, but it hadn't been eaten through. Whoever stored this knew what they were doing. Preservation, not abandonment. By noon, she had the floor panel off. And that's when she found it. A square cutout in the undercarriage. Not factory, not field mod either. Precision work, welded tight and sealed with a steel plate. She looked up at Jonah. "You see that?" He crouched beside her. "That's not in any manual I've seen." They pried it open. Inside, wrapped in wax cloth and tucked into foam, was a metal lockbox. No markings, just weight and silence. Claire pulled it out and set it on the workbench. Her hands trembled. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was anticipation, like the moment before. An engine turns over for the first time in years. Jonah leaned in. "What do you think's inside?" She didn't speak, just found the old padlock and cut it. The lid creaked open. Inside was a manila folder, sealed, marked Operation Silent Witness in block type. Underneath it, a slim black notebook. Beneath that, photographs. Dozens. Black and white. Some aerial, others ground level. Troop movements, landing zones, close-ups of German artillery placements, and American uniforms in places they shouldn't have been. Claire swallowed hard. These aren't supposed to exist." Jonah pulled one closer. "This is before the landings. How do you even get these?" She flipped to the notebook. More of Ashford's handwriting. If this operation had failed, they were going to deny it ever happened. The mission was ghost-written, classified above top secret. No unit, no insignia, just shadows. "I was supposed to destroy all evidence, but I couldn't." She looked up at Jonah. "He preserved it," she said softly. "All of it." He nodded. "Because he knew someone might need to see it someday." Claire stared at the lockbox, the notebook, the photographs. The truth was heavier than she'd expected. This wasn't just a relic anymore. It was a reckoning. Claire didn't sleep that night. The lockbox sat on her kitchen table like it had followed her home, daring her to ignore it. She tried to watch TV, tried to read, even tried to distract herself with an engine rebuild she'd been putting off. But her mind kept circling back to those black and white photographs, that sealed folder, that strange code name, Operation Silent Witness. By morning, she knew she couldn't keep this a secret any longer. She drove out to the VFW hall on Main Street. The paint was peeling, and the flag outside hung limp in the windless sky. But inside were men who remembered the war, even if their hands shook now when they raised their coffee mugs. She found Henry Daly in the corner, 93 years old, and still sharp enough to call your bluff. He'd been a radio operator during the war, and everyone in town still called him Sergeant, whether he wanted them to or not. She laid out a few of the documents, careful not to overwhelm him. He studied the first one, a map, and let out a low whistle. "I haven't seen this kind of intel since '44, he said. "Where'd you get it?" Claire hesitated. "From a bunker outside town. It was sealed." He raised an eyebrow. "Sealed?" She nodded. "Since the war. Belonged to a private Thomas Ashford. Logistics Division. Ever hear of him?" Daly sat back, eyes narrowing. "Ashford? No. But that name, Silent Witness, that was whispered. Not confirmed. Just rumor. Said there were operations too secret for even command to know. Stuff meant to disappear if it went wrong." Claire pointed to the lockbox. "It didn't disappear." He looked at her carefully then. "Not like a girl fixing transmissions. Like a keeper of something sacred." "You can't keep this," he said, quiet but firm. "Not hidden. Not now." "I'm not trying to hide it," she replied. "I'm trying to understand it. Someone went through hell to keep this safe. I want to know why." Daly nodded slowly. Then go slow, be careful, and choose who you trust. Back at the garage, Claire opened the folder at last. Inside were typed orders, dates, names, strike points, all blacked out with carbon smears and redacted lines. But some details slipped through. Ashford had been ordered to transport unverified tactical materials from a staging area in France to a classified naval vessel. It was dated the 4th of June, 1944, 2 days before D-Day, and the final notation scrawled in ink at the bottom. Final item, to be destroyed upon delivery. Claire leaned back, fingers pressed to her temples. Ashford hadn't delivered the item. He had hidden it. The question was why? She walked over to the Jeep, brushing dust from the hood. Her hand came away dirty, streaked with grease and time, but beneath her fingernails, history clung like oil. This wasn't just a restoration anymore. It was an unraveling, and she was in it now deeper than ever. The insulation crumbled like old bread. Claire pulled it from the bunker wall with gloved hands, flakes drifting down into her boots. She'd returned that afternoon with one goal: to search every inch of the space. Whatever Ashford had been protecting, it wasn't just the photos or the lockbox. It was something deeper, something personal. The crates were almost all open now, cataloged and labeled with sticky notes. She planned to digitize it all, maybe even donate the whole lot to a museum, but only after the full story had come to light. Something still didn't sit right. That's when she saw it. A hollow space behind one of the concrete support beams, no bigger than a shoebox, stuffed with aged cloth. At first, she thought it was more canvas, but as she tugged gently, a bundle fell free. Letters, dozens of them, bound by brittle twine. She sat on the floor, wiping the dirt from the top envelope. The paper was soft from time, corners curling. Each one was addressed in the same delicate handwriting. Miss Eleanor R. Maddox, Charleston, South Carolina. Claire's breath caught. She opened the first. Dearest Eleanor, I know I should have written sooner, but I've been buried beneath work I can't speak of, even to you. Please forgive the distance. I carry your photograph in my vest every day. It wasn't military correspondence. It was love, raw, aching, unfinished love. She opened another. They told me if this mission goes wrong, we won't get the chance to explain. That's what frightens me most. Not the risk, not the guns, but the silence that might follow. If you're reading this one day, know that I stayed because it mattered. Claire felt the weight settle in her chest. The ache of a man who knew he wouldn't be coming home, but hoped someone might one day understand why. The letters spanned months, some filled with mundane details: rain, boredom, the weight of endless waiting. Others hinted at what would become Operation Silent Witness. The way orders changed. How logistics weren't adding up. How Ashford suspected something was being erased before it even happened. And still, he wrote Eleanor. Always Eleanor. Jonah stepped into the bunker, saw her surrounded by letters, and paused. What is all that? Claire looked up. Her eyes were wet, but steady. His heart, she said. Everything he couldn't say out loud. She handed him one. He read in silence. Then sat beside her on the cold floor. They never got mailed? She shook her head. He hid them, like he hid the rest. I think he knew they'd never let his version of the story survive. Jonah looked around the bunker. You think she's still alive? Claire folded one of the letters gently. If she is, she deserves to know. Outside, the sky was turning pink, but in that concrete bunker, time stood still, and the words of a long-lost soldier finally had a voice again. The false floor was almost an afterthought. Claire had walked over it a dozen times. It was only when she dropped a wrench and heard the echo that she realized something was off. Hollow, not solid, like the rest of the bunker. She knelt, fingers trailing along the seams of the concrete. Barely visible, but there. The edges didn't quite align. Someone had poured a second slab over the first. Jonah helped her pry it open, careful not to damage what lay beneath. What they found was a steel crate, heavier than the others, welded shut. No markings. Claire stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "This is what he died for." The crate groaned as it opened, hinges shrieking in protest. Inside were more files, sealed pouches, and something wrapped in an oilcloth bundle. Claire lifted it carefully, peeling back the layers. A leather-bound journal, not Ashford's. This one was different. Stamped with the emblem of the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA. Its contents made her stomach flip. Detailed plans, recon photos, lists of names agents embedded across France, Belgium, even Germany. Many of the names had been crossed out in red. Terminated, KIA, captured. At the back, a sealed envelope marked, "For internal destruction, Operation Nightbridge." Claire opened it. The language was clinical, cold. If compromised, the following units are to be disavowed in full. No official record is to remain. All assets labeled expendable. Jonah read over her shoulder, jaw clenched. Jesus. They were planning to erase them. Their own people. Claire nodded slowly, her voice low. And Ashford couldn't live with that. He hadn't just stored this information. He'd hidden it from a government that was ready to bury it. That's why he never returned. Why his name never made it into the records. He hadn't deserted. He had defied. Claire sat back on her heels. The concrete beneath her felt colder now, the air heavier. Jonah placed a hand on the crate. "This changes everything." Claire stared down at the journal, her mind racing. "We need help, real help, someone who can verify this, protect it." "I've got a buddy," Jonah said. "Teaches military history over at the State University. Legit, quiet. We could start there." She nodded. "Yeah. But first," she walked back to the table where Ashford's letters lay. One sat off to the side, unopened. Thicker than the rest. Claire peeled it open and unfolded the contents. Inside was a note addressed simply, "To whoever finds this. I knew what they asked me to do was wrong. I'm no hero, but I couldn't destroy the truth. Not when men died believing their sacrifice would be remembered. So I sealed it all away, hoping one day someone with hands steadier than mine would know what to do." Claire looked around the bunker, the jeep, the crates, the letters. "I do," she whispered. Ashford hadn't vanished. He'd sacrificed his name to protect the truth. Now, that truth was in her hands. The university office was quiet, lined with books whose spines leaned from decades of use. Dr. Alan Meacham, a soft-spoken military historian with wire-rimmed glasses and ink-stained fingers, didn't say much as Claire laid the documents out across his desk. The OSS journal, the sealed orders, the photographs, the redacted maps. She watched his eyes widen, his breath catch. Then he did something Claire didn't expect. He took off his glasses, set them down carefully, and leaned back in his chair like the wind had been knocked out of him. "This is real," he whispered. "This is all real." Claire nodded. "I need to know what to do," she said. Dr. Meacham tapped the edge of one of the documents, still lost in thought. "Operation Nightbridge. I've only ever seen the name mentioned once. Footnote. Unverified. Most thought it was disinformation. But this," he gestured to the pile, "this is history that was never supposed to survive. And now it has," Claire said. Meacham studied her. "You could sell this, easily. There are collectors who'd pay millions. Or you could bury it again and let sleeping secrets lie. But if you want to honor what Ashford did—" "I do," Claire said, steady. "Then you have to go public. But carefully, quietly." Over the next week, the story began to take shape. Meacham helped her reach out to a small but respected veterans archive in Washington, private, protected, and fiercely committed to truth over headlines. They sent archivists in unmarked vans. No press, no politics. Claire watched them handle the files like sacred relics. They confirmed identities, matched agent names with long-closed files, reconstructed pieces of Operation Nightbridge that had never been pieced together. It had been a classified intelligence bridge between Allied spies and resistance fighters, and when it was nearly compromised ahead of the Normandy landings, the government wiped the trail clean. Ashford had been the trail's final link, and he chose to save it. They offered to house the material in a permanent exhibit, with a plaque, and his name restored. Claire agreed on one condition: the letters stayed with her. She wasn't done with them yet. A month later, she stood at a podium in a small public hall outside town. Veterans filled the chairs. Families of the missing sat in the front row. Behind her, the fully restored Willys Jeep sat gleaming beneath soft lights, olive green polished until it looked proud again. On its front bumper, stenciled in white, Eleanor. Claire cleared her throat. This story wasn't supposed to survive, she began. But it did. Because one man believed some truths are worth protecting, not for glory, not for pay, but because the people behind them deserved to be remembered. She paused, eyes finding the last row, where Henry Daly stood beside Jonah. And now, after all these years, they finally are. When the crowd stood in silence, it wasn't grief they felt, it was reverence. Ashford had been silenced by war, but today, his truth finally spoke. The bunker didn't feel empty anymore. Claire stood at the entrance, the steel door propped open for the first time in decades. Sunlight poured in, warming the concrete walls that had once swallowed time whole. Now, instead of crates and silence, the space had been carefully transformed. A modest but powerful exhibit, curated with care. Visitors didn't enter with cameras or noise. They entered like they were stepping into a chapel, a place where memory had been preserved, not erased. At the center, the Willys Jeep stood under a canvas awning, just as Ashford might have left it. His duffel bag was displayed beside it, the letters to Eleanor placed beneath glass. The top one still opened the words of a man in love, in fear, in defiance. The final placard bore his name, Private Thomas E. Ashford, 506th PIR, died in service of truth. Never forgotten. Jonah stepped in behind her, holding 2 coffees. Still, can't believe they turned it into a historical site, he said. Claire took hers, smiled faintly. I can. It was never just about the bunker. It was about what someone believed was worth saving. She looked up toward the ceiling, where a quote from Ashford's final letter was stenciled in soft gray paint. Not everything should be buried. Some truths deserve to breathe. That line had traveled across newspapers, websites, even a short documentary that aired on a military history network. But Claire didn't care much for all that. She wasn't chasing attention. She was keeping a promise. Weeks after the ceremony, she'd tracked down an address in Charleston, the last known residence of Eleanor Maddox. The house had been sold years ago. But a neighbor remembered her. Said she'd passed away in the early 2000s. No husband, no children, just a room full of photographs she never explained. Claire had sat on that porch a long time after hearing that. The letters had never reached her. But maybe, somehow, she'd always felt them anyway. Now, they were preserved. Read. Understood. And Ashford wasn't a ghost anymore. Back at her garage, business was picking up. She had 2 restoration jobs lined up, and a waiting list of veterans who wanted their stories told through metal and grease. Not just cars, but legacies. She'd even started a small project with Jonah, a non-profit to help families track lost war records. She called it Silent Witness. One afternoon, as golden light filtered through the bay windows, Claire hung the last photo from the bunker on her wall, the one of the 5 young men standing in front of the Jeep, grinning like they had forever ahead of them. Only one of them had left a trail behind, and she had followed it. Claire stepped back, wiping her hands on her jeans. The Mustang she'd been rebuilding purred in the background, but her heart was calm. Sometimes, history doesn't shout. It waits. And sometimes, it needs someone willing to listen, willing to get their hands dirty, to make it whole again.